The Volkswagen emission scandal, also known as Dieselgate, began in September 2015 when the United States Environmental Protection Agency found that Volkswagen had intentionally programmed turbocharged direct injection diesel engines to achieve their emission controls only during laboratory emission testing, which, by the way, caused the vehicle's output to meet the US standards during the regulatory testing, while they kind of emitted up to 40 times more in reality. Now, the share price dropped 42% over that period, or said in another way, Qatar, one of the biggest Volkswagen shareholders with a 17% stake in the company, lost nearly $5 billion as the company's stock value fell. And a combined penalty to Volkswagen and BMW, well, it was $1 billion and a total loss of $30 billion. Now, today, 7 years later, the share price has recovered and the 650,000 employees have kept their job, thank God. But a lot has been said about what happened, but very little actually had been said about how the management recovered from its biggest crisis in its 84-year history. That is until right now. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world and our World Business Forum audience. And by the way, also our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lidstrom and I'm your co-host along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there, including his latest bestseller, The Earned Life: Lose Regret, Choose Fulfillment. I have to say, it's simply a must read. Seriously, if there's one book out there which you have to read this year, I would say it's The Earned Life. But who am I to say that right now? Now, I have to say one thing. Keep an eye out for our special series on The Earned Life, where some of the most respected business icons in the world will join us to talk about their earned life. Now, if you have any questions or comments, just post them here. Or just tell us who you are and where you're from. And if you, by the way, like this show, don't forget to press the like button or follow the subscribe button. Now, one word which is rarely used in business, yet it has shown to have a profound impact, is basically a word which, when it's embraced, when it's truly embraced by management, it does just wonders. That word is imagination. So what does it have to do with Volkswagen? Well, with the help of our next guest, we'll soon find out. Marshall, tell us more about who's our next guest.
Well, before I do that, I have to introduce my comrade, Martin Lindstrom. Martin is the world's most interesting human being. So if you ever look at his background, he's, I think, the world's most interesting human being. He is Time Magazine 100 most influential people only in the world. He is a Thinkers 50 member for many years. He is the world's #1 expert on branding. He's the author of some spectacular books, including Biology, Small Data, Ministry of Common Sense, and also is a guy who's always willing to help out. He's done some volunteer work with me. We've helped people in various hospitals, people who needed help. And he's really taught me so much that I use all the time now in my coaching. So very honored to be here with my colleague, Martin Lindstrom. Hey.
Thank you, Marshall. Thank you. And listen, I noticed you said one thing. You said I've been in Thinkers 50 for many, many years. That means I'm very old. Now, try to explain that one, okay?
You know, when you said I was in the Hall of Fame for many, many years, then you're really old, and then you're really old. So now we have some wonderful guests today. Our first guest is Martin Reeves, Managing Director and Senior Partner at BCG. Very happy to have you with us. He's Chairman of BCG Henderson Institute, which is basically their think tank. So Martin Lindstrom, this guy must be smart because he's in charge of a think tank. That's very good. That's very good. He's an author of The Imagination Machine. He's an expert in corporate reinvention and rejuvenation. So very excited to be talking to him. Plus, he just seems like a great guy. So very, very happy to be here talking with Martin Reeves. So Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's nice to join you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, Martin, let's just get started. Why is imagination so important in business today?
Well, it's always been important. All companies are founded on an act of imagination. They bring something new to the world. But it's particularly important today, basically because in business strategy, there's something called the fade rate. The fade rate basically is, if you have advantage, how long does that last? And the answer used to be a decade or several decades. You could coast on the same business model for decades. Now the answer is about 1 or 2 years. What does that mean? That means that companies need to constantly reinvent themselves, and that requires imagination. The second reason is that we are now well into the AI revolution, where routine aspects of management will be replaced by machine learning. And so the challenge to the humans is to focus on more uniquely human cognition, and that's basically 3 things: empathy, ethics, and the title of my book, the imagination machine. Imagination is something that machine learning can't do. You can't analyze the data that doesn't exist for things that don't yet exist in the world. And the third reason I'd give is that the collective challenges we face, for instance, climate change, are really, really tough, and we actually don't have solutions yet. So this will require a tremendous amount of collective imagination. So for these reasons, I thought it was appropriate right now to flesh out something which is usually only considered in very vague terms, which is how to marshal the forces of imagination.
I love that. Marshal the forces of imagination.
Of course you do. Well, listen, Marshall, I love the name Martin. So here we go. It's 1-1 right now. Okay.
He's a good guy all around. So Martin Lindstrom, what's a good question from you?
Well, listen, I was just thinking about, I would love, Martin, if you could tell me about how you've used imagination in organization, because imagination in a machine seems to be a conundrum, right? Give me an example about how you actually have adopted that into it. And you also talk about empathy, which it sounds like it's a tool you're using to make the organization work with you.
Right. Well, the title does sound like a paradox, imagination machine, because we have an image, probably from the Romantic movement in the arts more than 100 years ago, that imagination is some sort of divine spark only to specially gifted individuals, that occurs at unpredictable times and couldn't possibly be managed or harnessed, which is rather strange because all companies are founded on an active imagination. We all have the capacity for imagination, and we don't really shy away in business from other complex aspects of humanity, like consumer psychology or team motivation. So as we dug into the science and the empirics of imagination, we came to the view that actually companies are imagination machines. They probably done more to change the world than any poet or visionary. They convert ideas into new realities. We just don't have a playbook for how to do that. So we came up with, if you like, a description of the process for collective imagination that consists of getting 6 things right. The first one we call the seduction, which is the impetus, the surprise which triggers the imagination. The second one is the skill of working the idea. The third one is colliding the idea with reality. The fourth one is we call the epidemic, which is ideas are like a virus, actually. Ideas spread. If they don't spread, they don't have any impact. And what are the conditions under which they spread? Then we had the creation of the new ordinary. One of the paradoxes, the true paradoxes of imagination, is if you're successful, the idea becomes so widespread and so commonplace that it becomes very boring, or it becomes unremarkable. So how do you create these unremarkable new realities? And then the last one is the, we call the encore, the last stage, because you're never done in business, of course. You have to not only imagine, you have to reimagine.
I have a question. As an executive coach, I've got a client who I need to give some advice to. And since you're here, I'm going to just have you help me out. He asked his top 12 leaders to spend 4 hours just imagining the future, coming up with strategy, ideas, 4 hours a week. The first week he did this, he was very clear, he wasn't subtle. You know how many people spent 4 hours doing that? 0. And I've been analyzing this because, in a way, it's hard to get people off of what's good for me now and really focused on what's good for the world in the future. Imagine you're coaching this CEO. Give him some ideas to help him.
Right. Well, yeah, I think you have to understand the positive and the negative forces that shape an environment of imagination. So on the negative side, the main reason why it's hard for large companies to reimagine themselves is there are really 4 things. One of them is insularity. A company is a bit like a sphere. The more you grow the radius of the sphere, the lower the ratio of the surface area to the volume. More and more jobs become internal facing. And the one thing we know from the science of imagination, the neuroscience, is that imagination is triggered by surprise. The human brain is a very good anomaly detection machine. So insularity. The second one is complacency. You and I consult with large, successful or formerly successful companies. That success can breed complacency, lack of urgency, no reason to reimagine is another enemy. The third one is inflexibility. It's very hard to turn the super tanker around. And also we have this mistake that we mistake our mental models for facts, whereas in fact they are choices. And then the last one is fear. As you know, many companies have a culture of compliance and fear. And if I'm afraid of making a mistake, I won't imagine. So what can leaders do about that? Well, there's a whole bunch of things we discuss in the book. One of the more unusual ones is we recommend an approach based on play and games. Now that may sound frivolous. We've invented 16 executive games to stretch the imagination, but actually I'm a former biologist, and biologically speaking, play is a rather serious business. Biologically, play is, what is it? It's accelerated, pleasurable, spontaneous, de-risked learning. It's a wonderful way of stretching the imagination. And so to give you a couple of quick examples, we have something called the bad customer game. The bad customer game says, go to the people that are not your customers, your dissatisfied customers, really get inside their head and imagine that they are right. You know, their lack of will to do business with you, they are right. And you reimagine your company to match that set of dissatisfactions, and it triggers new ideas. Another one is a fun one, a rather macabre one, is what we call the pre-mortem game. It's when you imagine giving the press conference to apologize for the collapse of your business. You failed to reimagine your business. And you tell the story, you make a convincing case for why you're apologizing for the death of your company 5 years hence. And if you take that exercise very seriously, you begin to uncover all of the hidden assumptions of your mental models and so on. So I find these games very powerful in a low-risk way, engaging people's imaginations.
And Martin, you're so right in what you're saying. I remember for one of our clients, Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, we had such a big challenge making them think differently. So what we did was we said, what would happen if you bought Uber, if Maersk bought Uber? And they went through these simulation scenarios, and suddenly they actually felt the pain the Maersk customers felt and could feel it enough for them to gather the troops and change the organization. So it's absolutely spot on, at least in my opinion, about what you're saying about gaming. I want to say to all of you guys watching out there that we'll give you the URL and the QR code for you to go in and visit and look at some of the games in the book which Martin has written. Okay, coming up, how do you turn around an 84-year-old German company and its 650,000 employees after having just witnessed a near life-threatening crisis? The answer will surprise you. But in doing so, I'm so pleased to have Gord Kell joining us. Gord is the chair of the Volkswagen Sustainability Council. He is the founding executive director of the United Nations Global Impact, the world's largest volunteer corporate sustainability initiative with over, get this, it's crazy, 9,000 corporate signatures in more than 160 countries. Welcome, Gord.
Thank you, Martin. Great to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I have to go straight to the point, and I apologize for this, but take me behind the scenes and give me a sense of the panic, which I'm sure you must have witnessed as VW or Volkswagen came to realize the consequences of Dieselgate.
Well, we were asked to join as an external body in 2016 when the crisis really kept on unfolding. It broke in 2015, but throughout 2016, the full dimensions of the crisis became obvious. And at that point, the leadership, the board of management was, I would describe it as in shock, paralysis prevailed, and fear. People were really scared. And half of the board members in those days were actually what I would call old diesel heads. So existential fears presumably came with it. And that was the moment when we joined in this deep disruption.
So tell me, this is a monumental task. I mean, turning around a 650,000 people company around. How in earth did they do it? How did you do it? What was the approach?
Well, in crisis and finding solutions, the key is first to identify the root causes as quickly as possible, to face reality. So our contribution was to kind of force or nudge executives to face reality and not run away and draw conclusions and learn quickly from it, admit it publicly, and make the changes that are called for as quickly as possible. Time is of the essence. And the second one is to use crisis as an opportunity for a new beginning. And that's where we were very lucky. We pushed for e-mobility for a diesel company in those days, where one of the board members, who was then the CEO of one of the brands of Volkswagen, Herbert Diess, he already worked on e-mobility. And he drew that conclusion already while the diesel crisis was unfolding. So our job was really to support that transition then and make the case there was enormous resistance internally first against this radical transformation, moving from combustion engines to e-mobility and a whole new set of technologies, digitalization. So our contribution was really to facilitate and encourage and enable that change as quickly as possible. And that's where the excitement came in. It took 2 more years before substantive amounts of money were made available. And that put then Volkswagen into a leadership position among the established automotive industries, being the first one to really embrace e-mobility on a massive scale. And with this change came also the realization to open up a closed organization, to look forward and to gather the momentum for a new beginning. So it was a process, I would say. Number one is face reality, draw conclusions, look for opportunities, new beginning, use the crisis as an opportunity, and then make it happen inside, which is always the most challenging way of doing things, I guess.
You know, I'm more of an expert on the micro level than the macro level. On the micro level, I worked in a pharmaceutical company that basically lost half their market cap in a day because, and then afterwards people were interviewed, do you think there was a problem? They pretty much said yes, but we just assumed the company was right. Here, kind of what happened on the macro level, there had to have been a lot of people understanding that something a little strange was going on. What kept this message from going up?
Well, Volkswagen obviously has its own history and tradition and is known as a brand. And there's some great writings have been done on the culture that prevailed in the old days. And that culture was being faster and bigger than anybody else. Classic industrial era mindsets, scale and scope as the only driving force, top-down management, more or less command and control. Every manager was trying to please the boss. Bad news was kept under the carpet. So anything you associate with the old industrial era, you would find in the old Volkswagen. And that's why the crisis then permeated so much and hit the raw nerve of the organization, because the organization all of a sudden realized that this way of doing business is not the future anymore. So that's why the shock was so deep. Besides, $30 billion in fines wasn't small either.
Now tell me, my name brother Martin, he talked about imagination. Tell me, how did you use imagination to get Volkswagen back on track?
Well, what Martin just described basically was practiced within Volkswagen, and under Herbert Diess' leadership, I really have to say lucky Volkswagen that they had him, because imagining another future and then making it credible and convincing your peers and your shareholders above all that this is the way to go isn't an easy job. And I think one additional element besides stretching your mind and imagining what is possible, the trigger obviously being the crisis, then you have to also paint a picture of the future that people like to believe in. Yeah? So you have to develop a narrative, a story of transformation, and you have to show a new North Star that your people are willing to follow. And that's then the hard lifting job. And engineering mindsets are very peculiar because they think they are on top of everything, they know everything. So changing a diesel engineer expert into an e-mobility expert, takes a leap. Yeah? So that was the real ongoing challenge then. But basically what Martin outlined was practiced intuitively within that transformation.
Yeah. It's amazing. So do you know what? I actually do think, I'll just ask my producer if we can do this, but I think we have a recording with the CEO of Volkswagen, which is a pretty remarkable person. As you said, he was voted the #1 CEO by multiple magazines over almost a decade. And he came back again, both as a chairman and as a CEO. So just for fun, why don't we run the BCG minute and just hear his reflection of the very situation. And this is an exclusive just for the M&M show. Let's take a look at this.
I'm Herbert Dies, and I'm working in the automotive industry all my professional life. So I'm a seasoned CEO. And it was always inspiring, interesting, because automotive industry is really a brilliant industry to work with. It's emotional, it's technologically very challenging. It always was. It's competitive. It's in everybody's mind. So I love it. The years to come will bring unforeseen change to our industry. Electrification of cars, and then cars becoming autonomous devices, connected devices, moving people and not being driven anymore. A change which is very difficult to manage because it involves all activities in automotive, from development, design, manufacturing, into sales. And it requires a totally different understanding of our customer. We will provide totally different devices, services into the car. So it's a lot about imagination and a lot about taking teams with you, which is probably the biggest challenge. Because some of us probably can imagine how cars are going to look by 25, 2030, how we are going to move people with those cars. And to plan this and to take the people with us. In our case, it's 650,000 people working in the Volkswagen Group, is probably the biggest challenge. So to explain this world, which is an imaginary world, by 2030, this is a big challenge. And I spent a lot of time in trying to explain people how this industry will work and how our products will be perceived by the time. I might be wrong in one or the other aspects, but generally it can be done. So we brought people into a position where they could understand why electric cars are going to work and will be dominant by 2030. And we're now in the process of explaining to our teams how important it is to not only be able to drive cars, but to produce devices which take all the responsibility to move people safe, to move people convenient, and that people can enjoy the free time in those cars with their devices they bring or with services we offer in those cars. So imagination plays an important role there, but being able to explain that, to bring it over, to get it into people's mind is probably the biggest challenge we are facing. But I think it can be done.
Now, Marshall, you have, you coach the list of who's who CEOs. When you hear the CEO of Volkswagen say what he's saying to us here, what thoughts are going through your mind?
Oh, a few things. One, I was a coach of Alan Mulally, who did a spectacular turnaround job at Ford, just an amazing, amazing human being. And so I thought about what happened with him. And I had another thought I'd like to share with both of our guests, if you give me your reflections. A good friend of mine is named Sandy Ogg, O-G-G. He used to work for Blackstone. He came up with this concept called talent to value. And he said, really, the key value drivers in any organization are not 1,000 people, it's a few people. And I can imagine the key value drivers in the new world are going to be quite different than the key value drivers now. And I know I'm going to hold you to the answer, but I'm going to ask each of our guests, in the new world of this autonomous vehicle, who are going to be the key value drivers? Either one of you can go. George?
Yeah, well, Herbert Dies would argue, and I think he's right. I mean, it's the digitalization, the technology, and the software that increasingly drives the value. And the shift is already obvious in many regards. The race is on for autonomous driving, and that's what the real next race is about. Yeah. And then obviously the ability also to use cars as some companies are starting to do as an energy storage vehicle as well in the energy transformation business, which opens up whole new opportunities for industry collaboration. It's a whole new business model emerging there. Then the vertical integration raises whole new issues. The battery cells, the technology behind battery cells, key element for energy, the race is on there as well. So it brings together a whole new spectrum of technologies that haven't found yet quite their dominant way in the real world, but you can already see and sense their potential. So you have to be on the front end of all of those, and you have to carry your people along with enthusiasm.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Georg. I guess there are two layers of change. There's the change in the world, the technical change, and then there's the change in the mind that needs to precede the change in the world. And so at a human level, you know, one of the things we do in the book, The Imagination Machine, is talk about the different personalities that are required at different stages in the process. So you need some sort of visionary at the beginning that has an idea and a story and a narrative to sell. You need somebody to work the idea. That's usually a very sort of conceptual person. You need an empiricist, an entrepreneur to collide the idea with reality, to observe the sparks, and then to work that. And then you begin to need the persuaders, the salespeople to scale the vision. And then you need the engineers to codify things. So I think cognitive diversity is incredibly important. You need all of those types in the company. Now, the trap is that if a company gets successful and one model becomes routine and sticks around for too long, you get into the business of hiring people that just optimize the existing model and run the existing model. But you should never let the maverick talent, all of these other skills evaporate, because any company is going to need them again at some point in time.
And which, by the way, plays very well into your model about the four different areas a company can evolve into. Both you have the classical, the adaptive, the shaping, and the visioning, right? Which is where I'm paraphrasing what you're saying, but you're saying you have to find the right approach first. And 50% of companies, according to BCG, is not doing it up front. And that is the reason why they're struggling later on. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah,
that was actually my previous book called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, which argued that the business environment is becoming more diverse. So we need not only different strategies, but different approaches to strategy in different environments. So very nascent, very entrepreneurial environments require a visionary strategy, the vision of bringing something entirely new to the world. That's one type of strategy. And then we have this very frisky stage where the technologies are changing, the regulations are changing, and we need a strategy based upon adaptive strategy. And then things become a little bit more fixed, and we need a classical strategy, more of a traditional sort of planning approach. And then in other environments, of course, it's not a single company that's reshaping an industry, it's an entire ecosystem, and that's a different type of strategy. So we argue basically you can't play golf with one golf club. You actually need five different types of strategy to play the game. And so essentially there's one new question to ask in strategy, which is, what sort of problem is this, or what sort of opportunity, and therefore what sort of strategy do I need before you go to the strategy process? So you could regard the book, The Imagination Machine, as a double click on this space of visionary strategy, which is going to be unleashed not only by technology, but I also believe we're in the early stages of a climate upheaval, a complete reinvention of business that is going to be at least as momentous as the digital revolution. So we need to be prepared for this again.
Okay, but fascinating. Sorry, you, Marshall?
Yeah, a couple of people I work with are in connected worlds. One of them is Jan Carlson. Jan just sold Autoliv to Qualcomm, I believe. And now it's interesting, Qualcomm is in the auto safety business, which would not have been a normal guess that Qualcomm would be in the auto safety business, but they are now. Another one, Aisha Evans, a wonderful person, is the CEO of Zoox, and Zoox reports to Amazon. And my friend Al Mulally is on the board of Alphabet. And of course, they have their own business too in the car business. How long do you think Volkswagen is going to exist, or are they going to get bought by Amazon? Are they going to be bought by Amazon, Google, Qualcomm, somebody in the tech world?
Volkswagen has all the ambitions to reinvent itself and to thrive within this new context and environments. The race is on. I think Volkswagen is extremely well positioned. They're very strong in the premium segment, from with Porsche and Audi, for example, but they're also very strong in the scale segment. And they're right now investing heavily and very much open to collaboration. There are many important new cross-industry collaborations taking shape now, which capture these trends. So I think the chances are very good. I think Volkswagen will stay Volkswagen. I'm pretty convinced. Actually, I'm willing to bet on that. Because don't forget, despite everything, in the physical world, you still need, at the end of the day, you need classic quality characteristics as well. You need the ability to scale autonomously. Volkswagen is very advanced in autonomous production, and they're building a huge new production facility now called Trinity Project, which would be the future of what some people call Industry 4.0. So the race is on, as always. Yes, there's never a guarantee. But I would say, given the open-mindedness that exists now and the many diverse strategies that are being pursued simultaneously, chances are actually pretty good.
And for all of you guys and girls watching out there, you probably noticed that George, just like me, have a little bit of an accent, which may indicate why he believes that Volkswagen will stay German. But just a thought about us talking about the whole idea of a search engine potentially buying one of these great car companies is just mind-blowing, isn't it? Okay, coming up, what do you do when you're deadly serious and basically burning for a cause, but you can't persuade your boss to change his mind? Well, our guests, in fact, one of our two guests, I won't recommend what he did, but he actually did something which was absolutely extraordinary, and it for sure did work. I just want to go back to you, George, because you are the man in question here. You worked at UN. First of all, how did you pull that one off? I mean, to set up that amazing venture within this very bureaucratic organization must have been I mean, you would tear out your hair, I think, in the end of the day, I could imagine.
Yeah, well, the phase one, and as we discussed before with Marshall, was during the golden times of multilateralism, where collaboration still worked very well. I was lucky enough to work for Kofi Annan, the only man on this globe whom I ever called my boss. I never would accept another boss. And I did a great speech for him, which was lucky. And he delivered a speech at the World Economic Forum, and we made the front pages of all international newspapers in Asia, in North America. And I thought, job well done. That was the first part. But then I was given the challenge to translate this lofty speech into a real initiative. And that's where the problem started, because the bureaucracy wasn't very conducive. So I did whatever was necessary. And at one point, I threatened suicide, to jump out of the 38th floor of the UN building if I didn't get my way, so to speak, in creating it, to overcome the barriers of the bureaucracy. And then that kind of, it worked to some extent. The boss agreed to allow me to build something completely new, which usually requires a General Assembly resolution, impossible, with executive power. And he put out his neck for me. And with the help of many friends then, such as Martin Revis, who has helped me from the beginning with the Global Compact, we could build a thriving global initiative with many country networks around the world. Hard work, building networks.
Well, it's absolutely amazing what you're telling about there. I just have to say to all our viewers around the world, do not use that trick with threatening with suicide. I'm just telling you there. And it will probably only work once. That's sort of another side story.
Yeah, that is actually true. But if you really want to accomplish something, you have to try everything you have at your disposal.
I love your attitude.
And sometimes the unusual, and actually they didn't take me quite serious first there when I threatened that. But then I repeated it and said it in all earnestness. And they were actually concerned that I'm slightly cuckoo. Yeah? And then, oh, well, maybe if you think, what do you have in mind? What exactly is it? And then I was invited to do a new governance structure. And then the boss, Kofi Annan, was just a great man, he would go for it.
I think we have, Marshall, the right team on this show right now to ask one of these hairy tricky question. And one of them is, I'm dealing a lot with it, and that's compliance. Compliance is a big deal in many companies, as you know, in particular in pharma and finance, right? And often, in my opinion, is adding another layer of complexity and bureaucracy to the picture. Now, I'm curious, Martin, using imagination, share with me how you would design the ideal compliance department, which on one hand does its job, but on the other hand, amplifies creativity and imagination and courage rather than the opposite.
There's this concept in strategy that's very helpful in this respect, I think, which is ambidexterity, which is being able to reconcile contradictions. And throughout history, many great thinkers have pointed out that thinking two contradictory thoughts at the same time is, you know, the epitome of sophistication. So here, of course, there are things that you can't do. You'll go to jail or you could destroy the company. So we need compliance in that sense. But preventing yourself from doing things, the wrong things, will never equal a recipe for doing the right things. So we really need both. And then the second thing I'd say is, nowadays there are so many risks that a very traditional approach to compliance, which is a massive standard operating procedure of the 1,000 things that you can't do, which, Marshall, you'll be familiar with from your pharmaceutical experience. Nobody can understand a rule book of 1,000 things and 5,000 procedures. So actually, we need imaginative ways of educating people on those rules. And then, of course, many of the risks don't have rules. I mean, the rules of cybersecurity are just in the process of being written. So actually, one of the uses of imagination is to imagine new risk scenarios coming out of the Ukraine conflict. I think there are some entirely new risks in terms of global supply chains, the geopolitics of business, cyber espionage, and so on, that we need to consider new types of risk too. So it's very important that we deploy both hemispheres of the brain as we consider these sorts of problems. And that comes back to what we were saying earlier about cognitive diversity, cultures of imagination, and the reconciliation of the two sides of the equation, running the business and reimagining the business. You have to do both at the same time.
Yeah, I would fully agree what Martin said and add, in my experience, you can become obsessed with compliance optimization and yet run into the biggest risk you haven't been aware of. And there's ample practical examples. So the cognitive diversity in this fast-pacing environment within which we move is ever more important. As a matter of principle, I would also say the simpler and the less the rules are and the easier understood, the better people are usually prepared, ideally in the form of simple principles like the 10 Commandments, what you should not do, where everybody agrees this is bad, you need that, absolutely. But the rest of it should be forward-looking, interpretive, and horizontally minded and connected. Unfortunately, the world is moving ever more into a law-based, compliance-oriented world with regulatory impositions taking away some of these degrees of freedoms. But for a thriving organization, it is key to have this cognitive diversity.
Yeah, I think that's key in strategy, Georg. I mean, I talk about something in the book called the race to optimism, which is one pattern of business strategy is that every problem, every constraint eventually turns into an opportunity for someone. And some leaders see that opportunity on day one of the crisis. We examined companies that had thrived during COVID, for example, and some companies saw the opportunity immediately. Others never got to opportunity. They were always in a compliance mindset. The best they could do was to merely cope with the constraint or the problem. So we look at many case studies in the book. The Japanese company Recruit, Amazon, Lego, many examples of imaginative companies. And one constant is that their leaders reconcile the urgency of a crisis, the self-apparent need to reinvent, with the pivot to optimism, the pivot to an opportunity mindset and a mindset of agency. You know, the belief that you can shape your business and you can reshape the world. That's the mindset of an entrepreneur.
Marshall, what a fascinating conversation. I just want to first of all say thank you to our two amazing guests for joining us. Marshall, can you just tell me a little bit what thoughts are going through your mind now if we should summarize what we learned so far?
Well, I'm going to get a new thought before a summary thought. That is one of the messages I've heard multiple occasions is cognitive diversity. You know, I'm a great believer in that idea. I think, you know, as a coach, what I try to do is now have my clients meet all kinds of people, CEOs from different industries, movie star, Broadway star, athlete, all kinds of people, because I really find that being around different people does kind of inspire the imagination, creativity, and moving forward, this has kind of hit me that cognitive diversity is going to become almost a requirement for the future, not so much an option. And what I ought to start doing as a coach is just getting teams of people who are wildly different to work with my clients at the same time and just try to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think it's very important, Marshall. I think, you know, the neuroscience of imagination says that it's triggered by three words beginning with A: anomaly, accident, and analogy. They're all different types of surprise, and homogeneous, internally facing cultures generate zero surprise. So that contact with different types of minds and different types of situations, which is all about the diversity of people and reality, is critical.
Yeah.
I
So
guess
anyway,
with those words, we will wrap the whole thing. And I think it's time for us to run the mural summary. Well, if there's one word which sticks to my brain right now, it's certainly cognitive diversity. But there's more to this. I also feel that the idea of combining two ordinary things in a new way, see things from a different angle, was really the silver lining of our entire conversation. What I loved was the idea, which both George and Martin said, that it's when you have a crisis, you can use it to your advantage and actually reset the whole thing. And I think the Volkswagen case is an extraordinary case in that regards. Now, one thing which I loved was Martin's summary of where are you strategically right now. So I just want to put out a little chart here just for fun. And it's not my chart, just so you know, it's actually Martin's. I'm stealing it. Please call Martin. I'm called Martin. No one will notice anyway. So we have unpredictability here on the left axis, and then we have plasticity, so which I call it because I can't pronounce the other word. I can't even pronounce the first word. But what I will put in here is, of course, the classical in the bottom left, and that is be big, and it's all about scaling, right? And then if we build up the model a little bit more, we have the adoptive part here. That's, I guess, where you are, very fast in the end of the day. On the bottom right, I will drag in here the visionary part. That's what we talked about now, and how difficult it is to be visionary, in particular when you have the compliance set, which is more restrictive. That's what George also talked about, how you have to, all these rules. Yes, you may have some guiding principles, but at some point in time, you have to put a line in the sand and then talk about the opportunities instead. And then last in Martin's model, you have shaping. That is the whole idea about you are the orchestra, you are running the show. And if you sort of were to expand that into the next fifth model, which is really where you want to go, that's where we have the renewal, that is to be viable. And what I think is interesting about this model, and the reason why I like it a lot, is supposedly a lot of companies are choosing the wrong strategy up front. They simply do not know what the core issue is. And that comes back to what both guests said. You have to recognize there is a crisis. That's what Volkswagen had problems doing. A good friend of mine, was the former head of the Dorchester Collections, Beverly Hills Hotel and Bel Air Hotel. He said to me, Martin, the key when you have a crisis is to recognize you have one. Most people don't do it. And I guess that's the essence of this model and of our conversation. And that's my summary. Marshall, it is your book month right now. Are you excited about your book?
Oh yeah, The Earned Life. It's great. I'm very, very excited about it. And it's going to be out the 3rd. Very, very exciting. So thank you for bringing it up. By the way, you guys, I'm going to send these two guys copies of the book and buy thousands for everyone you've ever met.
Fantastic. The Earned Life. And by the way, if you guys and girls want to learn more about what we talked about today, then you should go into the following. I'm putting a QR code on the screen right now. And what you can do is that you can either scan this QR code and go straight into marshallindstrom.com//mm/ again, And there you will find Martin Rees' recent books. You'll also find some of his games, which I would love to play some of these games. And of course, we'll hear a little bit more about George Kell and his amazing work as well. And you can see a recap of the whole show, also sound bites, if you want to send that to some of your colleagues, just to give them a little bit of a kick on the butt. Don't try the suicide one, but I have to say, George, I'm really intrigued by it. And it certainly puts the foot in front of the door. And do you know what? I think we so need it. So with that, Marshall, once again, thank you for keeping up with my heavy accents. And then I just want to say thanks to everyone. As Albert Einstein once said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world. It's stimulating progress and giving birth to evolution. And as I tend to say, imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it, we'll go nowhere. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Hey, bye-bye.
Every day is a new challenge, right? Is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more.
This is about leadership as a mindset.
We do work that matters for people who care.
We live in the age of the idea.